Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of sessions here at PDMI East. I'm Thomas Hare, the Chief Content Officer of the PDMI, and we thank you for joining us here at the show. Hopefully, you had a good time last night at the cocktail party, even though we had to hustle it inside there. And hopefully, you had good dinners, good business, and everything's treating you well. On behalf of CEO John Yarrington and our team, we're very thankful you're here, especially given the events of the first couple months of the year. So welcome. We're also very lucky to be here because of our sponsors, and particularly our sponsor here of the educational sessions, Paymerang. And we got Mike Johnson, the Vice President of Business Development from Paymerang, to say a couple words.
I know the last thing you guys want to hear from me at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning is a sales pitch. So, hey, thanks, guys, for having us. We really appreciate it. You guys have been great partners. We really appreciate the opportunity. We're really psyched to be back live in person rather than the Zoom meetings and webinars. But thank you, guys. Have a great show. And if there's ever any questions, just feel free to reach out. Thank you.
And roll the video. And Mike's got the video here.
People ask me frequently, what is Paymerang and why do you use it? I tell them that Paymerang is a great way to pay your vendors, and you also get money back. And usually they're like, that's too good to be true. You've got to be kidding me. And you don't have to do all the upfront legwork. So I talk to them about it and I tell them how it works. You sign up with them. They do all the research on your vendors. You send them your vendor list. They do the research. They give you an average of what potentially your rebates may be based on that information. Then with that information, you go through it. And after you've implemented, you can see it takes away so much time from your accounts payable team. You see that you no longer have to do massive bank reconciliations. You see the amount of time that it saves your team. I don't know why anybody wouldn't use Paymerang. So when I'm talking to other CFOs or I'm talking to other controllers, I tell them why I use Paymerang and I explain the process of using it. And then most of the people want to find out about it.
So thank you once again, Paymerang, for your support. We are here today. Is this on? No, it's not. There we go. For our Fireside chat, what's next in data automation? Some of you might have watched a webinar that we put on last September featuring Cordie de Pascale and Kevin Gaffney and a couple of their cohorts talking about data automation. We thought that that conversation was valuable enough to kind of continue here today. Had a lot of good feedback from our viewers of that, and want to get more of an update and get a little bit deeper in the weeds with them. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and take it away.
All right. Thank you. Oh, thanks. I'm Cordie de Pascale. I am Chief Strategy Officer at PremiumMedia360. We are data automation people, right? So what we do is we bridge the gap between the buy side and the sell side, because not always, you don't always have the same coding on both sides, right? So your media, client, product estimate, that kind of stuff doesn't always exist on the seller side. So it makes the transaction process a little bit more kludgy, right? And stop and start kind of thing. We harmonize that data. We use AI to sync the codes between the buy and the sell, and then we apply that throughout the rest of our product suite. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Some of what we're going to go over are all the different pain points that exist in the industry overall, but more specifically for direct response, and get into why some of that stuff was held back. And with me,
Kevin Gaffney from CoreMedia Systems. So Core is kind of the engine behind the performance marketing space. Media buying tools, analytic tools for the DR space. We process about $10 billion in spend annually through our systems, and we represent much more the buy side of the equation, where Cordie and PM360 are more kind of the middleware between the buyers and sellers. And so what we thought we'd do is almost kind of take you through a day in the life of how data moves around the space, and what we see as what's working well today and what we frankly think doesn't work well and is ripe for change. So with that, we thought we'd almost start at the buy side and say, how do people transact today from buyers and sellers? And from the core side, 80+% more of the volume that runs through us is national cable. And ironically enough, most of that is very manual. If you were buying the CW affiliate in Tulsa, a lot of that is automated. There are XML exchanges where you can say, hey, show me all your available inventory. They can send it to you. That data imports right into our system. We can send orders back to them in an XML format that they can import in. It's fairly seamless so that there's no hand keying back and forth. But if you're transacting with a cable net, a lot of that is manual. It's PDF, it's Excel, it's all of that stuff back and forth. And that's one of the first things that we feel is ripe for change, that you don't have people just keying data in on both sides. And that's one of the things that PM360 is trying to tackle specifically on the sell side.
Yeah, and one of the things that we looked at first at PremiumMedia360, and just a little kind of brief history, our chairman, John Bowser, really was kind of confounded by the whole process of, I need my reports, I have to have my reports quickly. He's a product guy, right? So if you remember the Jack LaLanne exercise products that were run on television, that was John and his company. So he was looking at, how do I get my reports more quickly, and how do I put data automation in place to enable the agencies and enable the sellers to speak the same language. And that's the genesis of what we did around airtimes. So if you think about broadcast verification, BVS, Sigma, those kind of products, we're actually plugged directly into Wide Orbit, and we can feed pre-logs and post-logs into systems like CoreDirect. So that's kind of our first foray into the market, and was around airing logs, and a lot of people call us the airing log company. We're not just airing logs. And we figured, if we can make it easier for DR, easier even for general market, to start looking at some of the performance metrics that we as direct response marketers and technology people have implemented over the last, call it 3-4 decades, we could make the industry perform at the speed of digital. And so that's kind of the impetus for where we got started. So airing logs is one thing, and we're on a path to building out more around the other parts of the workflow that are broken, so like copy instructions.
Yeah, so again, from the first part of the transaction starts with buyers and sellers, and I think one of the things that we want to be clear about is we're not trying to disrupt that. Well, I call it, it's not media buying, it's media negotiation. It's buyers and sellers negotiating and putting things back and forth. We just want to make it more automated so that it's not a manual process of keying data back and forth. So once you kind of tackle the buy side of things that starts with the order process, the next thing in line is the traffic or copy instructions. And that is generally a fairly manual process. And part of the problem there is most of it is words. It's, here is where I want you to run. I've got program hit lists. I've got separation requirements. I've got, different splits of what I want you to do. And that from a system side is very difficult because instead of, these are the days of the week, these are the time periods, this is the cost, like fixed data elements that you can kind of true or false against from a computer perspective, it's more difficult to do on traffic when it's a bunch of words. And so that is one of the next things that both on the DR side as well as the general side that we're actively pushing towards more automation, because if the traffic is good, it governs everything else. There's less discrepancies and there's less problems with the media as it's running. So again, working with groups like PM360 to be able to go in and not just throw a PDF over the wall at a network and say, hey, you've got to read all this stuff and hopefully hand key it all correctly into your system so that all the logs and everything comes across correctly. So that's another one of the things that the group like PM360 is trying to put the middleware to translate some of that back and forth so that everyone agrees to the rules of the game so that there'll be less discrepancies moving forward.
Yeah, and we actually at PM360, we started on that project with Wide Orbit. About 2 years ago, they have a product called EMI. And what we can do is we can take electronic copy instructions out of any media buying system or homegrown or whatever and transform that into a broadcast exchange format, which is kind of the industry standard, so to speak, around traffic automation, and feed that into Wide Orbit directly. And if you're not familiar with Wide Orbit, they have about 94% of the local broadcast market and a really strong chunk of the national cable market. So the cool thing there is if you're entering in your copy into Core, you could press a button and push that through PM360 directly into the network or station side, using Wide Orbit. And that's kind of where our forte is. We partner with companies like Wide Orbit, Extreme Reach, ECN, so that we could facilitate that data flow. And it's real important because, like Kevin said, if you have the wrong copy going into the hands of a trafficker on the station or network side, we catch that. We'll find those issues before they actually become a problem and cause revenue leakage. The sellers love it because it's like, well, great, I don't have to key in off of a document stand and punch in all of the data. It'll just flow into this dashboard inside of their system, and they can cherry pick and say, this looks right, this doesn't look right. Let me interact with the buying agency and get that fixed. And so, that's something that we're working on next with CoreMedia. We have it in place with ECN already today. So if you need someone to call and confirm that copy was received, ECN does a really nice job of that. But at the end of the day, that stuff is kind of already in place, and we've tested it, and we're happy to embark on that with CoreMedia and move that forward. But that's just one of the aspects of direct response automation that we're looking to enable.
Yeah, and again, from our side, as a representative of the buyers, the more hands-on keyboards is a bad thing. And so we really want to make sure that the more of this data automation just makes their lives easier. We're not trying to break or change a process that works today. We just want it to be a bit more automatic than it is. And so as you kind of flow through the day in the life of knocking out buys and knocking out traffic, the next thing that has been the struggle of the industry forever is log times. And so from a workflow perspective, most of our clients start pestering for pre-logs to the networks. And if you do a good job pestering on the Friday before, you can start to get some of those pre-logs in 1,000 different formats, in email and Excel and PDF, and all things that aren't very actionable, but you get them. And then many of our clients will work with like the BVSs or Sigmas of the world to do the verification. So at least you start getting a view of what's happening with your clearances. And then you start working towards getting post logs, which is the next Tuesday, Wednesday of the prior week. And so you're already 8-9 days behind potentially. So today's Tuesday. If a spot ran yesterday, the network's not telling you until middle of next week if they actually ran a spot or not. And again, from a lot of the linear world's getting compared to digital, and even at CoreMedia, we were acquired by a DSP, a digital company called Simplify. And as we get under the hood of kind of the way digital works, and they're measured in the fractions of a millisecond. Like the transaction starts and ends within milliseconds of, I've got eyeballs. Are you interested in this eyeball? Yes, I want to bid on it. Yes, I completed the bid, and keep going. And all billions of times a day that transaction happens. And when we start talking to them about, hey, in the linear world, and here's what we do, and it's this, and we get post logs next week, and you see the steam coming out of their ears. Like, how do you work in a world where, especially we're getting graded on attribution, and whether people are using our attribution engine or a third party. You can't do any attribution if you don't know the media is cleared. And if you don't have the log times, it's your attribution's in the dark. And the fact that we're waiting for next week in today's world for many of our clients to find out if a spot ran just isn't acceptable anymore. And so that's where, from the buy side, we're ready, willing, and able to take all of that data in as it happens. And that's one of the impetuses of PM360 is to try and shorten that cycle and get it directly from them, and not make it such a manual process on the network side, so that you have visibility in, like the fact that today you can't say absolutely what did I spend yesterday. Most of our clients can't do that today, because if it's not monitored by BVS or Sigma, they're in the dark until next week if they're actually running media or not. It's not acceptable.
Yeah, Kevin brought back some really fun memories for me, because I started out as a media assistant, and I was the guy with the document stand, key punching in all those airtimes and making sure everything looked right against my buys. At the time, I didn't have CoreDirect as a system. We had a homegrown system at JWT called Dr. Spot, and we were migrating to Core. We were looking to move away from that and into Core. But the interesting thing was, if you get in 300 airtimes, pre-logs or post-logs from CNN, for instance, and you got to sit there day in and day out and do that, but then also move on to your media analyst role, right? And like assess a market and look at what's happening in your green sheets and figure out where there are constraints. And then cable was a new thing. I mean, I'm dating myself, but cable was kind of a new thing. There were, maybe 10 networks at that point. But you got to pick up the phone and start calling all of these stations to get the airtimes. And I remember one time I called Macon, Georgia, and there was some kind of tragic event, and the person that did airtimes wasn't around. And I had my client screaming at me for the report. And I'm like, there was a tragedy in Macon, Georgia, and none of the stations, I can't get any airtime. So, those are the kind of things that, when we look at it at PremiumMedia360, they can be automated, right? There's no reason why the media assistant or the traffic assistant needs to be sitting there, or a sales AE needs to be sitting there and, generating a new report. Sometimes when they do it, they generate the wrong format and it can't easily be ingested. So we built an application that plugs into seller systems like Wide Orbit. We're working on things with NBCU right now as well because they have, kind of a bespoke setup, and CBS Viacom as well. When you think about the market and all the different systems, we simplify it. No pun intended, but we simplify it for them. Yeah, right. Checks in the mail kind of thing. But the thing there is, we can plug into the database, read the data out, and then transform it into whatever format is being used by CoreMedia or any other system that the agencies might have in place, which is pretty much CoreMedia. So at the end of the day, it's automatically ingested into their system. Whether it's a pre-log or a post-log, we automate the entire process. And the sellers have the ability to go in and schedule everything. I can deliver this multiple times during the day if it's needed. Or I can, send it out one time a week, but on a consistent schedule. So that way you're not constantly, as a buyer, picking up the phone and calling around for all those log times. So that's, kind of step one, phase one of what we've built. I wish it would have existed when I was doing the work because, man, I tell you, you spend 7 hours a day doing all those air times, and then at the end of the day, it's time for you to actually marry it up against your buys and figure out what worked or didn't, and then write a post-analysis deck, and then go through the whole process, rinse and repeat. Oof, this is a good system.
Yeah, and especially in today's world where talent and acquiring talent and keeping talent is so important. We're taking college graduates as media assistants and saying, hey, you're going to be keying log times all day long. And, we've got some of the big agencies where they have teams of 20 plus people banging away, keying log times in all day long. It's a miserable way to start your career. You can't be 100% accurate. You're always transposing an AM or PM somewhere along the way. There's all of that stuff that just, it frustrates me that in today's world we're still doing this type of work. There's no reason to have people hand keying stuff back and forth on each side. And so, the networks need the big kick in the butt to get going and embrace the automation. The buy side is absolutely ready to take that stuff in. And again, with middleware or whatever else, as an industry, it can't be acceptable that you're keying this stuff in, you're putting college graduates to do this work, and you're waiting 8, 9, 10 days to even know if a spot ran. It's ludicrous as your linear dollars are being consumed by connected TV and display and all of these other media that are the transactions over in a millisecond. Exactly, our folks on Simplify, our big brother now, they're literally watching it all day, minute by minute, what's happening in real time. And again, I did a big presentation for our group at Simplify and was talking about a lot of this process. And one of their heads of engineering said, I know you're speaking English, I just don't understand anything you're saying. It's just a different world that we transact in. And, we haven't even gotten into some of the other stuff that is still the legacy of linear, and it's, performance or DR or general is the same. The fact that you say, what did I spend yesterday? And our first question is, are you talking broadcast or calendar day? And again, from the digital side, they have steam coming out of their ears. They don't know that there's not a certain day. What did I spend last month? Are we talking calendar month or broadcast month? So all of those little things that we've got out here before you even get into the mythical $100 spot that no one actually pays $100 for, that $100 spot's $85. And so you start getting into all of that stuff, and we're blending data together from a systems perspective. And there's so much of that on the linear side that really needs to catch up with the world. Canada has made the change so that station gross doesn't exist anymore. Everything transacts in the actual dollar amount, but in the US it's still, everything is station gross, but you pay 85, if it's a $100 spot, you're paying $85 for it. So there's all of those things that to me is ripe for an update, and it's going to take everyone to say, all right, we've had enough, and we can't be we use the word Franken-system a lot, putting all this stuff together, trying to say, literally, we don't, if you say, what did I spend yesterday? I've got to ask you a question and say, what do you mean by yesterday? It's crazy to think that you can't even figure out what yesterday means. And that's where we are still with a lot of the data that moves back and forth.
Yeah, and it's wild for me because when you think about performance marketing, direct response, in particular, we invented the workflow for all of these performance-based activities, right? So where general market is now getting into the game and saying, well, we want to know what's happening in flight. We want to see where there's revenue leakage for us as agencies. And then also on the sell side, they're like, yeah, we want to know where that revenue leakage is also. Because we don't want to throw good spots toward, bad mistakes, right? To make it up. And I think, that's kind of the sweet spot where we've kind of set the stage for that workflow. But where we kind of missed was on the automation, right? So what we're doing now is to kind of catch up to digital and get all of those transactions moving at that speed so that everyone has a better experience and can get to their jobs, their actual jobs, and analyze the media that's transacting and trading and moving around. So that, when you're looking at that cost per analysis or you're trying to figure out what, budget needs to shift to another entity, you have the ability to do that more quickly and not be under the gun, right? No one wants to be there on a Friday night, at 10 o'clock trying to get that final report out to the West Coast client because, you're 3 hours ahead and they're 3 hours behind, and you hope that they're still hanging around waiting for that report and aren't sending that nasty gram to your supervisor. So a lot of that, what we're trying to build and what we have built helps to bring performance-based marketing into the digital, workflow, transaction flow. The funny thing about digital was, they never implemented the gross versus net thing, and I've been on the digital side as well. So having to explain that to digital marketers, they're like, "What?"
Yeah, they don't understand it. The whole thing is based on a $100 spot that no one pays $100. You don't bill your client $100 for it. You don't pay the station $100 for it. But the entire industry is transacting on this mythical thing that doesn't exist, and it just doesn't make sense to them. And it's because all of this gets to what the real point is attribution, and then kind of you made a noise and I want to track the results of that noise somewhere, and whether it's connected TV or linear or audio or whatever it is, all of this stuff is about driving results. And, again, we grew up, April 1st will be our 30-year anniversary, and we grew up in the old school DRTV, overnight yell and sell, and our business, like much of the performance business, is now DTC and drive to web, and no one's just running TV anymore. No one's just running a single media campaign. Everything is across omni-channel everything, and so especially with the Simplify partnership that we're in now, being able to put all that stuff together and pixel websites and bring all this data together is exactly where everyone needs to be. But linear tends to be the sore thumb again, in that you're always waiting for a log time, or you're waiting for something that, hey, I've also bought some local cable here, or I bought some Dish or DirecTV or something that was outside of the norm of what I'm used to buying, and I'm still waiting on log times, or they haven't confirmed this yet, or this is the wrong ISKI code set up over here, let me get that back together. And we've just seen it over and over again, and as more of the digital folks are kind of working their way up through the hierarchy at some of these agencies, it's like, hey, this linear thing's too much work. It's much easier. It's more expensive from a CPM perspective, but I can target, literally, we always say, especially looking at the Simplify stuff, there's going to be a lot of us wearing tinfoil hats around our office when you get under the hood of what they can do with the targeting and, geofencing and all that stuff. It's just a different world of digital compared to what linear can do. And there's a line that I saw someone say at a conference, and I've been stealing it ever since. The linear world is still transaction in age gender demos, Nielsen demos, people 18 to 49. And so you're literally targeting someone who's starting college and someone who's paying for college with the same demo. And it just doesn't make sense. And so there's all of this rich data out there, but until you can kind of start saying, hey, we need more of that, and we demand more of our linear providers, and I need immediate data, and I need better targeting and all of this stuff, it's just not going to change unless the people that are actually writing the checks to the network saying, I need more and I need better from you. The system providers, we're ready and willing to take on all of those projects. We just need the partners on the buy side and the PM360s and these guys to say, hey, we really need to step back and look at changing the model of how we transact, because the digital guys are there and they're going to take your lunch. I mean, they're waiting for all of those dollars to come to them. Every day you see a stat saying, hey, everyone's going to be connected TV next year, and they're a year away from being a year away from everyone being connected TV, which I don't necessarily believe, but the technology's there for them to transact in the moment, targeting every impression in the moment, and tell you about it milliseconds later. And linear is still 8 or 9 days behind. And again, we just don't think that's a sustainable model going forward.
Yeah, and we look at it and we say like, well, okay, if you have to have the airtimes in the system so that you could do your attribution and do things with core direct that other systems just can't do, you can kind of adjust and look at reconciled post logs on an immediate basis. So there's no lag time, and we actually keep pace with what you see from on the digital side, which is verification, viewability, right? Companies like Mode or Integral Ad Science, Double Verify, who have a little bit of an easier time, right? Because when you think about a digital placement versus a direct response order, it's kind of a one-to-one thing. That digital placement serves not only as the order or the I/O, but it's also your traffic. And it's also the thing that gets loaded into the ad server and then into the viewability company and then into all these other things. When you think about the cost of doing business in digital, what I think about is how much more expensive it is from a data perspective to manage those campaigns, because you're paying for each one of those things that I just mentioned, right? Whereas in our world, we're laser focused on that assistant doing the best job possible and getting all that data pulled together into a system like Core. The only aspect of what we have to think about is how much more quickly can we enable that person to get the job done. The other thing I want to point out about it is when you think about direct response and you think about TV in general, we don't have the issues around brand safety that you do inside of digital. So because it's broadcast and it's regulated, we're pretty much protected. And as long as our creative that goes over to whatever network is approved and actually makes the view tape versus air tape kind of scenario where they approve it and say, let's put it on air, and it's FCC regulated, great, we're safe. We're brand safe by default, right? We don't have to put other technologies in place to figure that out. But what we do need to have in place are things that, like the integrations we have at Core, to bring that data together more quickly so that you can act on it. So I like looking at that example, because when you think about digital and its powerhouse capabilities, there's a lot of costs that go into it. And I did an analysis for General Market, and I looked at cost per points, and it was one of my digital partners who wanted to transact in broadcast systems, right? So this is my Mediaocean days.
Yep.
So, no offense to my current company or Core. But in my Mediaocean days, I looked at cost per points. Digital cost per points were in the $6,000 range, transacting with agencies on a local basis or even on a national basis. And when you take those cost per points and you bump them up against what we all know are the cost per points in TV, you're an order of magnitude apart, right? Oceans apart. So, when you think about that, that keeps TV relevant. That keeps local, that keeps national cable, that keeps us relevant in our day-to-day. And it makes us stand apart, because while we might not be as efficient today, we are more efficient on a cost basis. And if we can apply efficiency and automation to the day-to-day, well, now we've really set ourselves oceans apart in a good way from the digital folks that are out there. And no offense to the digital folks, because I think you have to have a holistic approach to your campaigns. But the good point is we're less costly. We're more cost-effective in that regard.
Yeah, and again, getting to the crux of everything is attribution. And so whether you're using the core attribution model or one of the third parties, you just don't know what to do with it if you don't know where the media is running. And so from a response perspective, much of that is fairly well automated today. Even like through our platform, we have Google Analytics APIs where we can bring all that data in, call center, CRM system for sales data. So much of that is fairly painless because they're used to transacting digitally. They can send data out in lots of different formats. We ingest it in, we hit APIs, all that stuff. But again, you can't attribute something to a spot that you didn't know existed. And so even as part of our attribution engine, we're trying to say what is kind of the baseline, as we call it, is noise going to a website or whatever it is, and I only want to take credit for the lift above that noise. But if there's a bunch of media running that I don't know existed, it's just going to get lumped into baseline and say, hey, this is about the average noise going to your website. And then all of a sudden, a week or 10 days later, I find out that a spot ran. All right, no one's going to rerun their attribution engine. They've already made their decisions and moved on. So if your media is not included in the attribution when it happens, when in real time, you're being bought because you're cheap at some point. Like, that's why people are buying some of these things that they can't figure out from a real time. Did it run or not? Is it not picked up by verification? At some point, you're just getting graded because it's a cheap CPM, and that's not something that's sustainable as well, that you don't want to be the low-cost provider, and it's the only real reason you're on the buy. And so all of this stuff needs to be addressed so that every media, every noise you make can be part of the attribution and say, was it working or not? And for the things that are working, pay more for it. I want more of those eyeballs that are really doing well. You just don't want to be like, hey, I got thrown in on the buy because I was able to throw them, a bunch of no charges or, whatever. So again, I'm an advocate for linear needs to be accountable, needs to be immediate. The buyers are waiting for it. There's no reason technically why any of this stuff can't happen. It's just, again, from the station sales side, you can't wait 8 or 9 days to tell someone if a spot ran or not. It just doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah, and then kind of going back to what Kevin was saying about, discrepancies and latency in that process and in that workflow and what gets transacted. We looked at it from a holistic perspective, and we talked about the beginning process. There's proposal capabilities. You can receive broadcast formatted avails, right, and get that into the system. But when it comes to ordering, that's where things kind of go back to the PDF email, right, scenario. And the sell side then has to go in and key that stuff in. And does that get keyed in properly? You may not even know that you're running improperly until you see those post logs, and it's like, wait, I didn't order that rotation. I ordered something that was shorter and constrained. So without that order automation, there's a lot of room for errors there. And so, we took the approach with CoreMedia to automate that process. So any agency using Core, we don't charge for this, but any agency using Core can activate the PM360 order process, which feeds directly into the networks that are using wide orbit. And we're actually in the process of building out that integration more robustly. Phase 2 of what we're building is the revision process, which we know is like a huge process as performance marketers. And so we're kind of happy that we're on that path with the wide orbit crew and building that out. But we have the initial order capability. We can send orders out of Core into networks that are using the order workflow on the seller side. We think that's a really big next step, and it's also a good next step toward eliminating a part of the process where that assistant has to go and look and see, am I running these spots to schedule? Do they actually have the schedule that I sent, and did they key it in properly? So the more automation we can put in place and the less human touch points we have to put in place, the easier it'll be for the buyer to say, this is what I told you to run. You didn't run that, as today, but I sent it electronically. You should ingest it electronically and then accept it electronically without having to, manually retype the whole thing. And there's a lot of lines on those things. If you do a campaign that's 207 markets, 5-7 stations deep, and then you start rolling that across, all of the different cable networks as well, you're into hundreds, thousands of potential stations and networks on a buy. I mean, that's a lot of work for that kid to go in and look at all that stuff and figure out what worked and didn't. So, eliminating that one aspect of it is a good thing and gets them focused on the actual attribution and the actual process of figuring out what worked and what didn't. So.
Yeah, and then as we kind of wrap up the workflow, so we talked buying, we talked traffic, we talked log times ad nauseum, and then the final piece is the invoice. And that, thankfully, is one of the pieces that's fairly automated from a station network side, that most of the networks and stations can send that over electronically to you. Comes over in a flavor of what's called a 4A ZDI format that, again, most stations can transact in. That type of stuff gets imported in our system. There's also, again, groups like PM360 to normalize some of the tables of, I called it client A, they called it client B. Those should match and fix that up. But systems then match all that stuff up. Bring it in. I bought 9 to 4. That ran at 406. Do I want to accept that? Yes or no? I said, hey, originally my rate was 500. I got a rate reduction to 350. You still billed me 500 for it. That creates a mismatch. So all of that stuff is happening in systems today as well. And again, thankfully, that's fairly automated. But it's another one of those processes that you're still waiting to the end of the month, in some cases weeks after the end of the month to get those invoices and bring that in and reconcile. And we still run into the same stuff we were talking about before, where some of like the national networks transact at a cable month. Many do it on a broadcast month. So you start running into, we can't even decide what a month is anymore. Is it a 4-week month? Is it a 5-week month based on, where you are in the quarter in the broadcast? So all of that stuff to me is still ripe for change in that advertising shouldn't be, well, here's the way linear does it and here's the way digital does it and audio's over here doing it this way. At some point you need to say, here's the rules of the game and let's all play by the same rules. And again, from a systems perspective, provider, I don't care what they are. A date is a date. I can roll that up to a month if you want it to. I know what a day of the week is. We don't need to do a lot of thinking to figure that stuff out. It's just when, in the last 5 or 6 years, or even probably a little more, 6 a.m. start time for a day, 5 a.m. start time of the day, 3 a.m. start time of the day. Like even within the linear world, we can't decide when the day starts, and that keeps changing, so that there's all of that stuff. And then you start from, again, the systems provider perspective. If someone wants to run a historical report and say, show me for the last 4 or 5 years how data did in Peoria or whatever it is, what day, I'm using different start times of the day as you go back through that time. And so there's all of that stuff as an industry that, to me, again, is people just need to get together, and specifically more so the buyers in that perspective, because they're making decisions with the checkbook saying, here's what I'm buying, and say, here's what we want things to look like going forward, and gently or not gently encourage everyone else to follow suit, because Core can scream from the mountaintop and say, this is what we need. No one cares. I'm not writing money out to Viacom and Discovery. My clients are. So until those types of people are doing that type of work and saying, here's what we want from the industry, it simply isn't going to move quickly enough.
Yeah, you hit on some really good points there, I think. What we did with 4A's EDI invoices, because, the header codes where I started, right, media client product estimate, aren't required from the sellers coming in on an invoice, right? They can send it to your agency. They don't have to apply the header codes. It's like you could figure that out from the airing that happened inside the invoice detail, right? So the day, date, time, cost, and ISKI code or ad ID are your keys to figure out what campaign it belongs to, right? So a lot of the work goes on the agency to get that in place before it can be processed into Core. In our system, if you're using our software as an agency, if we have your buys, or what we call a master record, right? We can take all of your master record information, including your ISKIs and ad IDs, and then align that with the invoice coming in so that you don't have to manually apply all that coding to the invoice before it can be processed. So, we took that as kind of like the after effect of all of what happens in the workflow, but it's an important effect because if you're using us on the agency side for airtimes to harmonize those codes, we already have that in place. When the invoice comes in, we'll apply that invoice to that data and not only look at the header information, but we'll compare the airtimes that happen to the airtimes on the invoice to make it bulletproof so that we know these headers are the headers you need to process and ingest into the system so that when you're ready to press the button to match in Core, the right coding is applied and the right matching takes place. So I think, from a systems perspective, we kind of have that covered and that's in place already and ready to go. Could we do better on invoices? Absolutely. Could we do electronic payments? 100%. And I think, companies that are in place to do, electronic paying, that's a great business to be in because a lot of this header matching and a lot of this data matching gets made even more automated when you apply electronic payments. So, that's also kind of a big boon for our industry as well. And we're hoping, with all the integrations we've been working on, we're going to get there and we'll do it soon. The good thing is it's not just us alone in the industry. The general market side of the business has been doing this and is doing it. And they're looking to leverage a lot of what our expertise is on the performance marketing side. And so, which is great because that means the industry is starting to become holistic and come together around what does a marketing campaign look like? It's not just, oh my God, digital's the new shiny object. CTV and OTT and, all these video things are king. It's a holistic approach. Your audience doesn't just exist on TV. They exist all over the place. But if everyone is looking at us as the performance-based experts, a lot of what we know and a lot of our expertise is going to be applied across the board in all the other media types and all the other investment groups inside of your agencies, especially if you're in a holdco, right?
Yeah, and again, I think we've seen the linear TV space is coming to us as an industry. Measuring and doing a post against people 18 to 49 just isn't something that is very exciting for a lot of marketers. We're driving results. So we are the performance industry. We've been driving results forever. There's many more clients that we're seeing come live on our application that we're like, oh my God, that category or this thing? Like I didn't realize that they would be doing DR type business, and there's lots of that out there now. And so it really feels like the whole kind of shift is more towards, I made a noise, I want to track results of that noise. I just don't need to know that here's how many women 35 plus potentially saw my ad based on a Nielsen measurement. So we're excited about that side of things, but again, I just don't want the more of those people that move into the space, don't want them to be frustrated at the lack of, oh my God, there's a hurdle here and there's a hurdle here with data and another hurdle here. And so we're really aggressively trying to automate much of that. And then we've looked at buying, we looked at traffic, we looked at log times, we looked at invoices. The last piece from our side is, providing that data back to clients. So we do quite a bit of that as well, whether we've got our report writer called Core Creator, or we've got all kinds of replication things we do where we push data off the clients and they suck it into Tableaus and Power BIs and all these third-party dashboards. And all of this stuff, again, only makes sense if your data is good from the beginning. And so that is, to us, what our marching orders are for, near term. How do we get this stuff as automatic and bulletproof as possible so people are spending more time thinking about results instead of keying it in and trying to figure out what happened and why it happened and, why does this look funky? Whoops, I put another PM instead of AM over here. Like that type of stuff is embarrassing that we're still doing a lot of that stuff in Excel today.
I mean, outside of the embarrassment, I look at it like, coming from part of my career. So 50% of my career was in DRTV and working at Core, right, with Kevin. The other 50% was working on the general market side at MediaOcean, right? So, and some agency experience in between as well. But I think when I look at it, it's, everyone on the digital side is, talking about clean rooms and first-party data and third-party data and how do we marry it all up to figure out where our audiences are and how we can target to them and more specifically refine, and hone in on where are these people that we want to advertise to. With performance marketing, we already know that. We already have that. We can figure out in a broad sense in an advertising, campaign where those people are by the results that we receive in. So when we script or we write our, call center, script or answering service script, we can look for demographic information or specific information about the customer who's calling in that is also FTC regulated and proper, right? We have to make sure our scripts are good. We don't want to do any of that dark stuff that we were talking about yesterday on the panel. But when you think about the amount of data we have access to from those customers first party, and then the ability to track that stuff using customer identification and look at, life cycle value of a customer sourced back to their initial kind of outreach, right? That's powerful stuff. That's stuff that the digital marketing side has to put together from multiple data entities, multiple companies in a very expensive way. And so where we can leverage that through just, intelligent scripting and the right type of data capture from that outreach, from those responses, we're doing it very cost effective, A, but B, we own that data. We don't have to look at, okay, well, here's Nielsen, here's 4C Insights or VideoAmp or, wherever else the data might be coming from, then applied to Experian or some Axiom numbers around, what customer purchase behavior looked like, and then model out a whole big campaign and then, kind of predictively say, okay, well, this is where they're going to be, so we're going to put the money there, and then adjust results, based on that. We kind of know from our historical campaigns where those things netted out and where we need to go again, because we have been capturing that all along the way. I think that's important for us to kind of look at and highlight as an industry when we're going up against digital and thinking about how we're better, more effective, more efficient. Not just looking at what we talked about as things that our companies provide, but also things that the industry provides as a whole that make us stand apart from our peers, right? And it's time that the industry recognizes performance marketing, for what it is, and everyone's kind of stolen a little bit in piece from us. But when you bring it all together, that's what we've done. We've kind of set the stage for how performance marketing works for the industry as a whole.
I think we've rubbed right up our time, so I don't know if you have some questions that we want to...
Any questions from the audience?
Would you say the biggest hurdle is from the station side, that they're wanting to transition to the automation, or, I'm trying to figure out what you said earlier was like maybe the agencies have to apply the pressure to the station in order for them to get, these transitions going.
So if I just look at a post-log process, clearly they know when a spot ran today. They're not telling you about it until next week. Why is that? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And so they've got processes where they have to formalize their logs, and some of it comes back to like FCC regulations where they run through a formal process to say, here are my logs and whatever. But it doesn't mean they can't say, here is a pre-post log that tells you where the spot ran. Like, it's just process at some point. They know the spot ran. Why aren't they telling you that the spot ran until next Tuesday or Wednesday? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And, PM360 can plug in and see some of that stuff, and it's 99-point-something% accurate. Like, there might be something that occasionally falls off. We're fine with that. There's just no reason to not tell you that today is Tuesday, your spot ran yesterday. You're not going to tell me about it until next Tuesday or Wednesday if I pester you enough. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And, on the local broadcast side, it's less of an issue because we have many of the local broadcast sellers on our platform. So for them, it's, think about, Gray TV, Hearst, right? Those groups that, Gray has 500 stations, right? Tegna has, over 100 stations. Those are all automated. Where we see the agency outreach coming to, the sellers is on the cable network side. So, we partnered with NBCU. We have, their data flowing through. Same with, CBS Viacom as well. We're looking at our agency partners who are saying to us, hey, go get A&E. And we're saying to them, go call A&E, and we'll have that conversation.
Yeah, no one cares what we say. Like, they're going to listen to you and say, hey, I spent $40 million on Viacom last year. I need you to send my logs next day. And if 7 of those phone calls come in on the same day, hopefully they start to change their process. I can yell from the mountaintop all day long. Viacom doesn't care about me. I don't spend money on Viacom.
Right.
Anyone else?
I know we talked a lot about automation. What do you foresee as automating the negotiation process? Because for me, what I would love to go into is a portal, like eBay. I want to set my rate, and I want to know that I can book that media. And I think that that's the key piece if someone's going to develop that. So what do you see as the future
I'll jump.
for that?
So go ahead. On the core side, we actually, Wide Orbit is the big system out there that's a lot of the stations use. And we built integration probably 6 or 7 years ago into, they had a piece called a programmatic DR, a piece where literally our pre-buy system would call them up and call the station and say, what do you got? It would come back with all the avails. You can put in some of your goal CPMs or whatever and transact and do all of that stuff. But what we found was that many of the stations didn't want to include their inventory into it because they were commoditizing it. They thought that their prospect of making more money on their inventory was sellers negotiating with buyers. They didn't want to just throw it out there into a portal and almost turn it into programmatic that people can just put low bids on it and see if they accept it or not. And the project failed because the sellers didn't put enough inventory through it for buyers to actually say, hey, this makes sense.
So, with Premium Media, we looked at that approach, and we're working with TIP, right, the TV Interface Practices group, and we have been working on this holistic avails capability. And one of the things you actually validated my research just now. one of the things we're approaching is automating the avail process for that back and forth negotiation. So we're talking to partners like Wide Orbit and others like Operative and on the sell side to enable the buy systems to have that capability to go back and forth on the avail. Because you can do that on the order, right? We can send revisions and we're working.
Yeah, it's not a technology problem. Like we're ready, willing, but like when we built the API stuff into Wide Orbit, we rolled it out, we made a big push, and then realized that they were just putting junk in there that they couldn't sell otherwise. That was the only inventory they were making available for like this online bidding thing. Yeah. And at some point, people stopped even looking at it because there's no point in saying, hey, every week I'm going to look to see if there's some stuff out there that I can automatically start adding to my buy, and coming back with no data again because either the station said, hey, I can sell this at a higher margin, using my sales reps, as opposed to just putting into an exchange that people are bidding on.
And we're looking at that as kind of like, a tiered rate card structure, right? Because the sellers have, the holdco, agency, direct response, advertiser, all those different flavors of rates. So I think as we're building and architecting that capability, we're looking at it from the approach of what's the media type? Where's the rate coming from? Is this something that's opportunistic? Are we looking at scatter? Are we looking at, a DR buy that just kind of came to us and landed on us? And, making it safe for the seller to, put that inventory out there to the agencies, to the buyers, and then also enabling the agencies to make the request based on what they need and their goals. If you know that you need to spend a certain amount by market or even by cable network, and you're comfortable with sharing what you want from the seller against that goal, they would have the ability then to apply whatever rate structure is in place and needed and send you, as if you picked up the phone, whatever the avail looks like against that request.
Yeah, and even from the Wide Orbit side, when they built it in, they literally had it so that a station can go and say, if the agency is X and their client is Y, show them this rate. If the agency is B and their client is A, show them this rate. So all of that stuff to kind of protect some of that was there. They just couldn't convince the stations to say, take the inventory away from your normal sales reps and run it through this thing.
Yeah. And I think the stations like that we're in the mix because it's like they don't have to work with Wide Orbit directly on that stuff and give them or give up access to inventory or margin to enable that. They can license something from us, and then it's like, okay, great. We'll just go ahead and push the inventory through your filter, and then that hits the buying system. So, another partnership for me to work on with Wide Orbit. But
yeah, it's not a technology. Our plumbing is essentially there. It's not a technology challenge. It's against the industry fearful that they're going to commoditize their inventory, and they don't want sales reps to. They think they can add more value using sales reps than they can just putting it on exchange and let computers do some of the talking and do that.
Right.
Any other questions, folks? All right. Well, thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Come see us back here at 10:30. We'll be talking about creative strategy and how we have some good spots to view. So please stop back by.